Okay, welcome everyone. So sorry, we're starting a few minutes late, 13 minutes. Technical glitches, always happen. That's what makes doing a virtual event so much more exciting, right? Otherwise, it would be quite boring and table stakes. So we have quite a few folks joining us from so many different places today. That is incredibly exciting. So we have Toronto, Los Angeles, Vancouver, Edmonton, Berlin. Okay. Hi, Sarah. I'm right now. I wish I was in Berlin. I was supposed to be in Berlin in November, but right now I'm in Münster in the northwestern part of Germany. So glad to see more folks from Europe joining in and staying up late. Vancouver, Canada, Oakland in the house, USA, New York, Brussels. Oh, more EU folks. Yeah, glad to see you again, Simon. Paul Singh joining from Toronto. Vanessa from Vancouver, Chris from Toronto, San Francisco, Calgary, Seattle, Birmingham. Wow. Okay, quite a few folks. I won't use up all our live stream to read out the names, but incredible to see so many folks joining us from literally two different continents. So that's really, really exciting. I am extremely excited about the talk today. A topic that's I think always stayed quite critical, but especially right now, given everything that's been going around this year. So really glad that Karen chose to join us for this virtual talk and speak on this topic. So really excited about not just the talk, but the conversations that are going to come out of this talk. So I am assuming most of you know about us, about our community, DesignX. So we are. We've been around for about 3.5 years now. 3.5 years. And we started in Toronto, started with, the basic goal of helping elevate design and designers across the globe. We have our Slack communities. We have the DesignX Slack community, but we also have a different Slack community called the Design Leadership community. We host events and workshops like these from time to time, virtual conferences. We just finished one called 5 to 9 about a month ago. We also put together, community resources, including job boards, newsletters, conference directory that I think now it's over for the whole year, all the programming, but we are already working on next year's list of conferences and design events to go and attend. So that's like a very quick walkthrough about our community. So a lot of online stuff, and right now mostly online stuff, but when things hopefully will go back to normal, also doing a lot of offline conferences and events. All this community building is, does not happen without the support of our partners and sponsors. So a massive shout out to our friends at Intersect, Danielle, Izuru, and the entire team at Intersect for supporting us, to help us continue to put together more initiatives for our community. There will be a lot of exciting, lot of thoughts that will be going through your mind today. I'm assuming as you will, hear the stories that Karen will be sharing. And if you are, going on social media, sharing those thoughts, sharing snippets of those stories, do include us in those conversations. Our team really enjoys, getting the social love. So our handle is @WeAreDesignX and the hashtag is DesignX Virtual Talks. So that's been a lot of me talking. I won't take up a lot of more time, and I will invite our next speaker. So really excited that Karen, once again has joined us to speak about this topic. By day, Karen is a UX designer at Atlassian, where she's working on the next generation B2B e-commerce experiences. Before Atlassian, she graduated from the Ethnic Studies program at UC Berkeley, where her research focused on inclusive design and relations of race and gender in the software industry. So definitely, not only someone who's passionate about this topic, about this domain, but also is quite knowledgeable and has already spent some time, studying it as well. And so I will stop talking now and let's welcome Karen to the screen. Hi, Karen.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for taking our time to join us today.
No, thank you for having me. And thank you all for taking the time to come to this talk.
Where are you joining us from, Karen?
So I'm joining from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Has it been like I just through podcasts and some blog posts I've been hearing that a lot of folks have been leaving the Bay Area now that companies are going remote. That's true?
It's so true. Most of my friends have left the city.
Wow. I hope that brings the rents and all down a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit.
Amazing. And then how have you been the last few months, managing work and everything else?
This is always a tough question to answer because I never know what to say besides I'm doing fine or okay.
Mm.
And
Right.
I think like sometimes it's like very highs and lows. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, this really sucks. And then other times I'm like, I can deal with this. Like as long as I can talk to people over virtual calls and see their
Right.
faces, I should be okay. And then it just goes again.
Right. Right. Yeah. And thank you for candidly sharing that. I think one reason we also sometimes ask this question from our speakers, especially is, when you're, especially for folks who are early on in the field or, are looking for their first job in this scenario with everything going on this year, it definitely feels that they're disjointed from the rest of the community. And then kind of everyone is trying to make the best or trying to get through this whole year. With the hope that things will get better soon, maybe. So Karen, why this topic? We've gotten submissions in the past. We've had speakers in the past speaking on this topic too. But one thing that really caught our eye when we saw your speaker submission was that you when at UC Berkeley, even your research focused on this specific domain. So it was not just a thought that sparked from reading a blog post and then you submitted a talk, but it's been something that you've been really kind of invested in, right? And not just passionate about. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think I'll touch on this a little more in the talk, but this project is really personal and vulnerable for me because I do identify as a woman of color and I do work in UX design. And I've definitely had experiences of aggression in the industry. And I think this kind of triggered me to go into studying ethnic studies to learn about my lived experience, like as a Taiwanese American woman entering into design, like in my early career and all that stuff. And that's why I chose that path versus just doing like a typical like computer science or design degree. And so I thought about this question a lot because I felt like this helped me learn about who I am and where I come from and how I can help other people as well. And I think this topic and ethnic studies gave me the tools to help me become a better designer. And I hope I can help share this as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I won't take up a lot of time, so let's let's get started. I'm really excited to hear your talk.
Thank you so much. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So hello, I'm Karen. I know we did a little bit of introduction. I use she, her pronouns. And thank you so much again for taking the time to learn about this talk with me. And I say learn because this project is still ongoing and realistically, I lived through these experiences as well. Like just yesterday, still working on the slides, still learning about all these things that are happening in the industry. And I'm currently speaking about this talk on Ohlone land, which is also the Bay Area. So this land is owned by the Ohlone people, and I've done most of my research here as well. So I'm a second generation Taiwanese American designer, and by day, I'm a UX designer at Atlassian. I also recently graduated from UC Berkeley studying ethnic studies last year, and I know we talked about that, but just wanted to give it a little introduction again. And what you see here is a photo of me and some of my teammates, which was taken by our other teammate during my first design internship at an agency in Lisbon. And at this time, I still wasn't sure I wanted to pursue design, but it was actually the time I decided I wanted to study ethnic studies. So I didn't have a traditional design degree, but I was learning ethnic studies to become a better designer because it gave me the tools and knowledge to better understand my lived experiences and my positionalities as a Taiwanese American woman, as an early career designer, and also the first in my family to graduate college. And so what we're talking about here today is an extension of the research I had done in my undergrad with the Ethnic Studies program, where we learned about the effects of race and indigeneity and centered on our learnings on communities of color within and beyond the United States. And so my personal question became, so I was asked a personal question from my professor, Professor Sushitani, and she asked me what was a personal question that I had and that I wanted to answer before I left college. And this would essentially become my research question that would guide the research I was doing. And so this personal and research question that I had was, do the racialized and gendered identities of women of color impact their experience in UX design? So to answer Professor Sushitani, while it was research, it also felt part inspirational because I wanted to hear from other women of color in UX design, how they were doing, and if they felt like they quote unquote made it, because maybe I'll be okay too. So working on this project has been incredibly meaningful and vulnerable for me, as I said, because at the time I was researching the reality I live in next year. Because at the time when Professor Suchitani asked me this question, I had just signed my return offer to work full-time at Atlassian. I still didn't really know what I was doing, even though I was very fortunate to have a job lineup. And I wanted to see what other women of color in UX design were doing, how they were doing, and more of this reassurance, like maybe I'll be okay if they're doing okay. And so I was also looking for existing research. And I only found one article online on the women of color in UX design. And it wasn't even an article, actually. It was actually the last section of the article. It was like, we were talking about all this women of color in tech, all this stuff. Oh, and then, like, we have some room to talk about women of color in UX design. It was just like the afterthought of like, this project is still ongoing and there's still so much research to be done. And so I had to go broad and I went into full discovery in academia, as they call it, doing the literature review and looking for studies in other related areas. And I noticed similar themes between STEM higher education, the United States high-tech workforce, as well as HCI, or human-computer interaction. But the most salient theme was intersectionality. Intersectionality is a framework introduced by Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw to talk about the erasure of Black women in anti-discrimination law. So this law treated gender and race as separate categories. So the anti-discrimination law only saw Black women as either Black or a woman, not as a Black woman. So intersectionality is actually a lens to examine how gender and race interact to oppress Black women. Intersectionality has also been used to describe the race and gender dimensions of violence against women of color. Women of color experience a complex convergence of oppression for being a woman and a person of color. So not only are they discriminated for being a woman and a person of color, but they experience this multitude of experiences of oppression as they live their lives as a woman of color. It's not one on top of the other. It's this whole unique experience. But at its core, intersectionality is about how certain aspects of who you are will advantage or disadvantage you in life. Intersectionality extends beyond women of color and Black women. It's a lens to see how someone's race, gender, sexuality, class, abilities, age, and other aspects can increase their access to good things or their exposure to bad things in life. And only in the past decade, intersectionality has been applied as a framework to understand the discrimination of women of color in tech. And 3 years ago, intersectional HCI emerged and began a conversation in the industry about intersectionality identities of the users we are designing for. So there's been a focus on the identities of the users without taking into consideration the identities of those who are designing for those users. There wasn't a framework that I had seen existed yet that described the experiences of designers. And what women of color in tech are experiencing can speak to the conditions they have to design in and how the solutions that come out of it are created. Like, who is considered successful? Who are we designing for? Which intersectional HCI helps answer by talking about users' intersectional identities. Why are we designing it this way? And what for? Oops, sorry. Just lost my notes. And so if we take a look at the example of Nextdoor, Nextdoor is a social networking service for neighborhoods, but it's also a neighborhood surveillance service, as I like to call it. So Nextdoor is reportedly considering going public through their special purpose acquisition company at $4 to $5 billion valuation. Nextdoor, among other tech companies, have been under fire for their harm on Black and Indigenous communities and communities of color. And Nextdoor has a Karen problem. So there have been articles like this one speaking about how users on Nextdoor would post on the platform labeling Black people as suspects for walking down the street or just riding a bike. Neighborhood residents would also encourage each other to even call the police if they saw something suspicious. And Nextdoor itself even had a forward to police feature for 4 years, where users can forward their posts to the police directly. This feature had recently been removed in June this year, actually, amidst the Black Lives Matter protests. Nextdoor was designed to police and look for suspicious behavior, even before the behavior, whatever it was, even happened, and how to report from the beginning. It was designed in a way that made it easy to racially profile Black community members and report them to the police without any consequences for those who post, but they were highly detrimental to the ones who get reported. And it goes back to these questions. Who is considered successful? Who are we designing for? Why are we designing it this way? And what for? Design isn't enough to reconcile or reduce harm. Removing the feature or posting guidelines on racial profiling are not enough to reconcile the harm caused on Black community members. We can't design racial profiling away. We must take into account of the existing prejudices of a team and how systems perpetuate those prejudices. And so what can accountability for this industry look like? So the editors of the book Beyond Survival, which I highly recommend this book, it's a really great reading. It talks about the transformative justice movement, which seeks to solve the problems of violence using community-based approaches without relying on punishment, incarceration, or policing. Accountability plays a huge role in the transformative justice movement. They define accountability to include naming the behavior and the impact of our actions, issuing an apology, and taking specific steps towards reconciliation or restitution. And so if we take the example of Nextdoor, what accountability could look like for them is naming the behavior, that they made it even easier to surveil, racially profile, report Black community members, as well as Indigenous and people of color, and then issuing an apology for that harm, and having tangible ways that bring back power to under-resourced community members. So what could the product look like if the team was full of people who prioritize the safety of Black community members? It would probably look a lot different. And who are the people behind creating these sorts of products, and what are their political goals? What kind of environment do they work in? How does the culture and environment justify and drive their priorities, principles, and constraints? Broader systems like patriarchy, capitalism, racism, sexism support and facilitate these structures, like how a person gets promoted, what work gets prioritized or not, what the fiscal year company goals are. These broader systems can justify from how a person gets treated to how certain design decisions of a feature are being made. And we can see through the Nextdoor example that the consequences are detrimental. Nextdoor makes us reckon that racial profiling exists within our society, not just about the people on the team who care about Black lives, but also the system that perpetuates these and even rewards people for them. And we see how tech can be harmful to users, but how are designers behind the technology being harmed, and how do systems perpetuate prejudices we hold on to that harms users with our designs. And so we talk a little bit about how we have this framework of intersectional HCI to look at users' identities and their experiences, but there wasn't a framework to examine the designers' identities and their experiences. So holistic intersectional design focuses on the designers' identities and their experiences. Holistic intersectional design is a lens to describe how women of color designers embrace their intersectional identities as they design for users within a patriarchal, racist, and classist space. And we'll use this to help us frame as we listen to the women of color in UX designs and their stories. Their experiences within this space is directly related to the products that come out of this space. So holistic intersectional design is a lens to describe how women of color designers embrace their intersectional identities. And given the harm caused by technologies like Nextdoor and with the rise of intersectional HCI, designers' experiences within the space is directly related to the products that come out of this space. And so for this project, I spoke with 7 women of color in UX design between the ages of 27 to 33, and they all had within more than 4 years of industry experience. And I focus on this age because this was around the time when I saw a lot of people would decide whether they want to pursue a higher individual contributor role or go into management. And these women are all based in the US, particularly in the Bay Area and New York City, and I talked to them for each an hour. And so because of our limited time together with this talk, I'll only include 5 of them and their stories. And throughout this talk, we'll listen to what they say about their experiences working as a UX designer or a design manager, and they'll talk about it with us. Their stories will be read by a Black woman and other women of color. I'll also use different names to conceal their names and protect their privacy. So for Haben, she identifies as a first-generation, half Eritrean and half Haitian American product manager. And so I include her because she actually has 11 years of UX design experience. And she's currently a PM at a large social networking company. And then there's Alice, who is a Chinese American design manager, and she works at a medium network company. And Jennifer, who's a Latinx UX designer at a medium IT company. And Ritika, a South Asian senior product designer at a large social networking company. And Aaliyah, a Canadian lead UX designer who works at a medium-sized 3D software company. So for Haben, she describes a process that happens at one of the companies she works at. And so Haben is a first-generation, half Eritrean and half Haitian American product manager at a large-sized social networking company. And before working as a product manager, she was a UX designer for 11 years and even worked for a major civic tech organization that connected job seekers to workforce services.
The civic technology organization had mostly liberal white women and men with very few people of color. We were serving very diverse communities where there were hardly any white people. But the chief innovation officer and their team we were working with were all white, upper middle class people who had come into work wanting to help people, yet never went into the neighborhoods where the people of color were and had no relationship with them whatsoever. It felt weird to me.
So no amount of empathy can create a lasting impact for the effective community they worked with without having a relationship with them and co-creating with them so they can have resources that is by and for the community. And what Haben describes is reminiscent of parachute researchers, which has been occurring in public health emergencies, actually. Parachuting is when researchers, typically those who are European and American, even people of color, would fly into affected countries in Asia and Africa, for example, conduct research in isolation without having any relationship with the affected communities they were supposed to work with. And then they would immediately fly out without creating that lasting impact or sustainable infrastructure for them. And so parachute research can be actually detrimental to emergency responses and to affected communities, as it not only prevents the sharing of resources that is important to public health for everyone, but also fails to improve the capacity of the affected communities to combat future outbreaks. And parachuting practices still happen often in tech. So what types of practices do we still hold on to that prevent stakeholders and community members to become co-creators in the solution they'd be living in? What if community members were as involved and had ownership in the process as much as the researchers and designers? Haben actually puts co-creation into practice and uses community-based approaches in her and her partner's design process.
My partner and I decided we were going to go against the grain and build something open source to put this app in the hands of the community members who were doing the real work on the grassroots level. We wanted to make the workforce seem transparent. We interpreted complex policy language into more casual language and found resources they needed to apply for affordable housing. We wanted to make sure these things were accessible, but it wasn't championed by local government because it wasn't a shiny thing.
And so how can we create a system that supports practices like co-creation? Failing to recognize and fairly compensate co-creators occurs too often, unfortunately, in this industry. And so Alice, who is a Chinese-American design manager at a medium-sized tech network company, shares her experiences of finding out she's been underleveled and underpaid, and the moment when she confronts the company.
When I found out how undervalued I was, they never acknowledged it, even though I was clearly upset about it. When they did performance reviews, they made all of our levels public. I found out the ugly way. I clicked on everyone's names and saw their levels. I noticed that the people who I thought were my peers were 1 or 2 levels above me. I decided to put this on a spreadsheet, and I saw there's a pattern of seeing white men and women being promoted. When I confronted them about it, they did not handle it well, and it became a huge fallout. That was not the first fallout I had related to stuff like this earlier in my career, so it felt like a sad pattern.
It felt like a sad pattern. So for Angela Davis, she's an activist, academic, and writer that advocates for abolition feminism, which is, in the words of the National Feminist Color Organization Insight, abolition feminism is based on a collective commitment to guaranteeing the survival and care for all people. Dr. Davis says, diversity without structural transformation simply brings those who were previously excluded back into a system as racist, as misogynist as it was before. So Jennifer is a Latinx UX designer at a medium-sized IT company. She describes the microaggressions that happen from her PM.
My head of design asked me to document all the times my PM wasn't great to me. I ended up with a 20-page document of instances over the past 5 months. I wrote about my guilt and shame being first gen coming from communities of color where we're told to care more about the collective rather than the individual. I didn't want her to get fired. I think she's a good person and I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. I realized that my greatest microaggressions and feelings of imposter syndrome came from other women of color in the workplace. It was shocking to me because I understand if a white person gives me microaggressions, it's because they don't understand what being a woman of color is like. But when it comes from another woman of color, I felt that of all people in the room, they would understand my struggle the most. I learned that unfortunately not all women, when they're climbing the ladder, want to bring other people up, and that's their choice.
So woman of color is a solidarity definition. Self-identifying as a woman of color means a commitment to support communities that have been oppressed. This term was actually created by Black women as a way for self-determination and to promote cross-racial communities of struggle that come from common political aspiration goals, like collective liberation for everyone. And so like any terms, if it's used incorrectly, women of color does erase Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous people, and trans and non-binary folks, and the intersection of those. Tech does disproportionately affects Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous people. And so as we learn about how certain aspects of who a person is gives them advantages or disadvantages, Ritika, who's a South Asian senior product designer, describes her advantages.
I felt advantaged being South Asian because I'm able to build quick rapport with the engineers who are mostly East Asian or South Asian. Although my position is non-technical, my technical competency often goes unquestioned. I've worked on many teams with engineers who have never worked in product before, And the traditional response is that they would quote unquote ice out the person who is new or don't think is necessary for the success of the product. They'll tell the designer how they want it built, or they'll ignore the designs that the designer provided. And I've noticed engineers who are typically South Asian doing that to other people on the team, but not to me. I felt like they were more willing to include me in conversations because I was like them.
So culture rewards and punishes certain behaviors. Systems and culture set up a privileged norms of success. So who are we used to seeing as successful? What type of behaviors are we used to being successful? And so from these stories, we can see that success is defined by the individual over the collective, competitive over supportive, white women and men, East and South Asian men over Black and Indigenous people and women of color, solitary practices over co-creation and collaboration, and even engineering over user data and design. And so anyone who did not exhibit these aspects and behaviors don't fit into these privileged norms of success and actually are disadvantaged. And I've actually also seen and been in organizations where they say they aren't like this, and they always want to work together regardless of who they are. But hearing these experiences is actually not the case. And it's not enough for a figure or a company to say, I'm collaborative. You should believe me that I'm collaborative because I'm saying I'm collaborative, when those who are actually working with them don't share that same sentiment. And so Leah and Hubin share how the system punishes them.
To get over those frustrations, I worked twice as hard and burned myself out to make sure I had data and research to say that the data wasn't coming from me, but from users. Because if I said I had an opinion, I found out in the first half of my career that it was useless to say how I felt or what I thought about things because nothing came out of it. There's this innate knowledge that people hire you because you have the ability to make certain deductions. I didn't feel like I had many opportunities to do that.
And for Hubin,
I'm used to people second guessing my opinion. If I have strong convictions on a project, I'm used to being met with strong force and pushback. I'm used to people telling me that I'm too ambitious and telling me I can't do certain things. I'm constantly getting that negative energy as a woman in color in tech. I've learned to take that energy and use it as fuel. It sucks and it's not healthy, but that's the nature of the game. And I hope that I can be in the right spot where people can start giving me positive energy.
That's the nature of the game. And so what if in these situations, someone had said, I believe you, I support you, I trust you? Their situations may look a lot different, actually. And in design, we talk a lot about empathy and being human-centered, but empathy is still centered on one's own experiences and focuses on one's own feeling rather than doing it for another person. And so for me, for example, I will never understand what it's like to be a Black woman because I am not one. I do not have to experience another person's struggles in order to do compassionate actions for them. And so I encourage less feeling and more doing. So exercise trust and compassion over empathy. How can you decenter yourself to center someone else? Hubin actually shares an experience of having an effective ally.
My partner, who was a white female engineer, and I pushed for doing work that had very tangible impact with the local communities we were working with. My company, which was a white institution, wanted me to get fired because they thought I was causing a lot of trouble. But I had a white ally whose words were like gold and everybody listened to her. I was lucky to have her as my partner because if it had been anybody else, I would have been out immediately.
She would have been out immediately. So what Hubin describes here is that support from allies is critical to the advancement of under-resourced communities. A culture, a space, an ally are defined by those who are most at risk. Signs of an ally is when the ones you are allying for says you're an ally. Signs of successful co-creation is when the other person says that we are co-creating. Signs of a space is when the ones who are at the most at risk say they feel safe. And so effective allyship takes on the risk associated with bringing the issues up. It's a verb and it's not easy. And so we've seen different forms of violence against women of color in UX design. There's the lack of trust, being undervalued, underleveled, and underpaid, proving self, and then burnout, then guilt and shame for leaving their communities behind, and the aggressions and the emotional tax, all coming together. And I use the word violence because all of these forms negatively affects these women and harms their mental, physical, and emotional health. So we must acknowledge that these different forms of violence against women of color are struggles to their persistence. I want to stress the word persistence because they continue to persist and keep going and going. They embrace their racialized and gendered identities and struggles to empower themselves and survive, and also fight for those who have to bear the brunt of racism and sexism. And it's not enough to talk about individual bad actors, like a product manager harassing their colleague or a company creating a harmful feature. Removing a bad actor does not mean that the company has gotten rid of its racism and misogyny, although it is a step. And if there are so many barriers to hold a bad actor accountable, that speaks more about the systems and the structures themselves. And we heard them say from their stories that they're used to feeling undervalued, they're used to getting negative energy, that it really felt like a sad pattern for them. And these phrases tell us that these instances aren't unique to a particular company or an individual. And so how do certain systems support and normalize an individual and their actions and how women of color are treated? If we see these instances as individual problems rather than harmful systems working the way they're supposed to, then we let everyone off the hook. So instead of thinking that the system is broken, think that the system is designed to work the way it is supposed to. This way, we can imagine otherwise and design other possibilities. We have the power to end harmful systems and envision new ones. We can envision and create systems that lets queer, disabled, immigrant, Muslim, Black, Latinx, Southeast Asian, Indigenous, Pacific Islander, non-binary, trans people, and women of color to thrive. Because they are the future. And so abolitionists and Black feminists and Indigenous people have been doing this all along. And so if you had to take away something, it would be to hold yourself, your peers, and this industry accountable and protect those who have to bear the brunt of harmful systems like capitalism, racism, sexism, classism, all the isms. And then invest resources to movements that prioritize collective liberation for all. So knowing where the big tech money goes and what initiatives, movements, organizations that they support and that they work towards to guarantee the survival and care of all people. And most of all, exercise trust and compassion over empathy. Like, I believe you, I trust you, I support you. Thank you.
Wow, that was really amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. Usually after such thought-provoking talks, I find it so hard for myself to come back and come back all cheerful and be like, so yeah, that was incredible, because I'm thinking about all these things that you said, and trying to kind of dig into my own personal stories and what all these things happen. But yeah, thank you so much. There's a lot to think about and also to act on, I think, from everything you shared today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just about a few weeks ago, I was reading Nextdoor is launching in Canada, and I was really excited just because I was like, oh, a neighborhood thing. I don't have to go to Facebook for the neighborhood group. And now I'm like, evil Nextdoor. No.
For me.
Yeah, a lot of appreciation coming for you. I'm just gonna pull out some comments. Robin, Bird by Bird, amazing, really great, thank you. Yeah, so I sometimes plug in like a audio applause, but these are all the comments applause that's coming for you. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for not just sharing, all these stories, but I think the way you tied all those together, just from a storytelling, presentation point, and communication point, was really, really incredible. So thank you so much for that. Do you like going back to when I was talking about my excitement for Nextdoor? So usually I've seen on design Twitter, on other places, there are always two schools of thought, and I just want to see, what you personally think, what you've seen around you, at the university or in SF, which is, you look at a company and you're like, like that's an evil big tech company. And literally for any big tech company these days, like, from Google, Facebook, Twitter, right, Instagram, all these things, people are like, they're causing a lot of harm. And again, there is no kind of a defined metric to tell like more harm than good, or for most of them. For some, yes, it's pretty clear, with their practices. So as a designer, is how do you kind of approach looking at that company? Do you feel like, oh, you know what, like I would love to go in to a company like this, right? So it's and kind of like change it from within and start these conversations. Or the other practice, school of thought, I say, is like, completely let's stay away. Oh, my video seems hung up, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Okay. No worries. I'll refresh myself in 2 minutes. So the other school of thought I find is, let's stay away from these big giant tech companies, and in fact go and start like a grassroots alternative, right? Which one path, or maybe there's a third option, do you lean towards, or you've seen also like other folks in your circle, like how do you respond to such kind of the environment around us?
Right. That's a really good question, a really tough one. Actually, I think about this a lot, and I try to take a step back, because it's like, why do we have to make decisions about what type of company we want to work in, if they're even ethical, and will we want to support them, or will we just like be a cog in the machine and doing whatever everyone tells us at the detriment of other people? And I think the guiding thing is that from like abolitionists and Black feminists, they work towards the collective liberation of all people, and that everyone survives and they're cared for. And I think that even as we work in these companies, and it's pretty inevitable to like ignore them, because it's like they've made it so that we are so dependent on them for our survival, and that it's like the broader system working, and we're kind of just these like people in these systems, but we can change that. We don't have to make this decision of, I can't change any of this for happening. There's always going to be a Facebook or Google like that. We can do something about it. And I think that guiding thing, like, am I working towards a collective liberation for all people? Whether you work in like, I'm just throwing out a big Amazon or something like that. It's like, if you think about that, even the work that you're doing, it really changes your priorities. Like, we talk a lot about design principles, and we always go back to those principles whenever we make certain design decisions. That's the same thing. It's like, what are our values? And I don't blame like the individual company, like the Amazon, the Facebooks, or the Googles, or I don't blame people for working at those companies, because, like realistically, it's like they pay well, you have to survive. People have families, we don't really know what people are going through, but it's like, why do we have to continue perpetuating these systems and have to work in these environments to live? It's like, we don't have to do that, and we can change that. So I don't think it's like the either or of the school of thoughts, but hopefully that sheds some light on it. I'm not a very good host. I don't really know what to say. I wonder if I can see any questions or comments. Ooh, I never heard of that book, Liz. Definitely add it to my list. Thank you, Linda, for coming, and everyone else.
Sorry,
I was just for a little bit.
I'm like, you're on your own, Karen. My tech troubles seem to be plenty today. I thankfully my video hung up, but I was able to hear you. So that's like a really good point. Not kind of like initially like starting with the onus on us. I completely agree with you on that. The problems definitely are so kind of muddled that usually I find, even when you're having a discussion with someone about much needed topics like these, where so much discussion is kind of needed to exchange opinions and learn about or evolve your opinions collectively, I find usually folks either take one side or completely, it's like mental fatigue, and you just completely ignore it and leave the step, which is not quite the best way to go about it. Jessica had a good question, which was, there are some great quotes and references to your books, including activists, and are there further kind of reading, research, resources or places that you go to or you would recommend folks that want to dive deeper into the topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually reading that. I was like, what could I recommend? Like, this talk is really a lot of the work from like Black feminists, lawyers like Kimberly Crenshaw, Angela Davis, who is really an advocate for abolition feminism. I think if you just look up prison abolition on Google, you'll get tons of stuff. There's so much reading about it. I think something that's related to what I talked about, and if you're interested in like surveillance, and it's the next door example I talked about, there is a writer called Ruha Benjamin,
Mm-hmm.
and Ruha talks about like the new Jim Code and how like you look for these like quote unquote criminal behaviors before they even happen and all that stuff. And she explains it a lot better than I'm doing right now, but I really would lean on them to look through like all the research.
Thank you. I think even a few other folks are asking for some links or recommendations. So what we'll do is, after this talk, we can reach out to Karen and see if we can get a list of either articles, books, or even names of authors that folks can go and dive deeper into. Simon had a question, I think similar to kind of the early question that we were talking about, that systemic discrimination, be it in schools or companies, trickling down from large-scale societal prejudice. And so, is it possible we have to solve this from a higher level? How do you define that higher level? I don't know. A lot of but I think this thought is often kind of heard about. Right? Like, you're like, oh, this is all like so deep rooted. Because you work at a bank, then you feel bad if you know more about how the bank makes money, then you feel bad about it. If you kind of work for an agency, then you find your clients are mostly that are paying the bills are these kind of institutions that, again, if not contributing actively to it, they're also not working. They're not focusing their resources or energy into helping resolve any of these issues. So, where do you start? What lens do you put on for this?
Yeah, good question. Also tough. I think it's, and this is a lot from like the readings I hear from like abolitionists and like prison writers as well. It's all about the collective and the community. You don't have to do this alone. Like, just doing this as an individual and taking on like capitalism, I'm going to defeat capitalism and all that stuff. No, it's not going to work. So I think it's all about like finding the people who share this, like, oh, we're going to work towards like collective liberation for all people. And there's actually a lot of people who write about this and like things to do. Like, I was reading like Ruha Benjamin's article the other day, and I'll also include this in the list as well. And she was talking about like it's really great. It's super important to invest like money, resources to schools and all that stuff as opposed to prisons because we want to support like education for everyone and all that stuff. But we have to be mindful of where the money goes to because we can still send these resources to schools that kind of employ the same logics as like the prison industrial complex. And that's a whole other thing. And Michelle Alexander's book on the new Jim Crow talks more about that. But it's basically like, you know, things like detention, like being punished at school for like not showing up on time and like, you know, you wear certain clothing and they think like you can't wear that to school because blah, 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 by other people's perception of you. That's sort of like the logics of like the prison industrial complex that are affecting schools. And it's like you don't want to keep supporting that even though, you know, public education is like really great and having education for everyone as well. And it's like starting from that and like talking to other people and having those conversations because not a lot of people think that. They're kind of just like, you know, just like throw money to here and all that stuff. And it's like we kind of have to follow where the money goes. And that's where I learned from Tatiana Mack, who's also a speaker. And Tatiana talks about like, you know, follow where the money goes. Like you kind of can figure out what are like company or an enterprise or schools like values and what do they value? Like, do they value the collective liberation for all people? All that stuff. And I guess like to actually directly answer the question, how do we solve this from a higher level? It's from community. We can't ask for permission from management or people who are seen as successful because, I mean, they are successful because they fit those privileged norms of successes that they're able to climb the ladder and get to the top because they're able to exhibit like certain behaviors that are rewarded, and that could mean like putting other people down. And so it's like we have the power to be able to change that.
Right. So true. That's yeah, really well said. I forgot the name of the interviewee. That you were talking, like you shared the quote from, but that individual said, you know, I use whenever these kind of like discrimination or even comments come across, I use it as a fuel, right? In your kind of your personal opinion, or you know, I don't know if there's a right way or wrong way, but what do you see more commonly happen? Where you know you take all these things and there is not a lot of reaction or even thinking about like, you know, how I'm going to channel this to solving it, but you just fuel it to climb your own ladder, right, and get successful. Or you're like, no, you know, this is the time to have that awkward conversation. Because where I'm leading to is, you know, I've seen personally, I've experienced that in companies where, you know, I felt some things weren't right, and you know, I would start a conversation in a Slack channel or somewhere, and then I would have folks coming to DM me to say, you're like talking to political things, like don't say anything publicly, you know, just message a person because someone might interpret it the other way, which is true, right? So when you're writing in text, like people can take out 10 messages, especially when your first language is not English, right? So there are so many layers, right? And so I then generally, I'm like, I feel this kind of struggle where I'm like, okay, yeah, like whatever you're going to, you know, put on me, I'm going to channel it towards fighting it back. And I've stopped talking about it in the public more and more, right? Because I'm like, oh, it's completely useless, or people are going to just stereotype me that, oh, this guy is always angry about something, right?
Right.
What do you, not a solution. I think they're like, Karen, this is the problem. How do you solve all these big issues?
Yeah.
But what would you recommend?
It's tough for every single person because it's like we don't really understand what each person is going through. And if I was in that position, and I have been before, I think of it as like when someone asks a question and they're like, there are no dumb questions. You should ask it because someone else might be thinking about it too. And I think it's like when I think of it that way, I'm like, like I have some power to be able to change this or address this. And part of accountability, as we talked about, like with that quote from Beyond Survival, accountability includes naming the behavior. So it's knowing like what are we doing, what is the harm that's caused, and holding people accountable to that. And it's like, how can we create ways to hold other people accountable? And I hope that like people get the chance to be in organizations that follow that accountability method and able to listen, because not everyone is perfect. Like there's no one is gonna like not cause any harm no matter what. It's like we all cause harm, but how do we address that? How do we hold ourselves accountable to it? And it's like having that conversation, and it's not just like I have to tell this other person and they have to approve it. What are other ways can we show effective allyship and to help myself or other people included, to support any other people who join that company or organization?
Right. Yeah, that my Slack pings. That definitely resonates with some of these solutions that I've or some of the ways that I've seen, at least companies' perspective also, how they can nurture these kind of spaces, safe spaces to have these conversations. And I pulled up a question by Liz, because she was kind of asking as a follow-up again on the same thought that, any practical tips that companies can incorporate in their processes to make women of color, immigrants, more welcome. And I would even say, like, again, broadening it to, welcome and also continue to have these conversations and include others in the same.
Right. Good question. This is also a tricky one because it's like my first response is, well, I want to ask them, like, are they doing okay? Like, how are they? Are we doing enough? Like all that stuff. But that kind of like puts the burden on them to tell you, like, I'm not feeling great. And then the follow-up question that we get a lot is like, okay, what can we do? Can you tell us what to do? Like, do we need to read something? Do we need to like donate or like tell us what to do? And that just like places the burden on like the people who experience like discrimination, and then that's just a lot to go through. Like on top of that, doing work, waking up every day, pandemic, all that stuff. And I think it's like I go on the notion that they've already been saying things, and we just have to listen. Like all these stories, it's because of the stories that we talk about is because we asked, and all of them talk about like they've already told other people, but they just weren't listening and they didn't hold themselves accountable to it, and like all those fallouts and stuff. And so it's like being able to listen because they're already telling us like what's going on, and like trusting them, supporting them, and being like, okay, I will do that, and holding like yourself and have an actionable plan of like what to do to accomplish that. And it's like you keep doing that until someone says, maybe like in a random meeting or something, like you didn't even ask them, like, I feel happy at this company. Like then that's like a signal of like, okay, things are going okay, and I'm like listening and stuff. So.
True. Karen, that was an incredible session. We'll take one last question. I know we're already almost 10, 12 minutes ahead of the time slot we asked you for. And so it's a really good question by Mohan around, how do you extend trust and compassion beyond the immediate co-workers, or even I would say like, people in your direct influence, to the people who've been discouraged from entering into UX in the first place, or, based on your talk, I would even say like entering in even tech in the first place, right?
Right. Really good question. It's like, how do we extend the impact of our trust and compassion to not only those around us, but people who may not be able to experience that maybe in their lifetime and stuff. And it's not a one size fits all. It's like have trust and compassion for your coworkers, and have trust and compassion for other people, and trust and compassion for like people who want to get into UX design. It's it's not a limited source. It's like it's endless. You can continue like giving trust and compassion to other people. And I mean, I always believe in like, if you do it to someone else, they'll feel that and they'll continue doing that because
Right.
you're showing ways of how to show trust and compassion. It's like that's like the practicality of it. It's like you're giving them examples of, oh, this is like what it feels like to like have compassion and to like be trusted and stuff like that. And it's like, again, like people are doing it, they're speaking about it, and we just have to listen. It's like, when someone messages you on LinkedIn asking for advice, like you can give them some advice and help them out. Or if your company is having some event and they're like, oh, we don't know what to do, like offer some suggestions. Like there's so many moments in our lifetime that we have the opportunity to choose trust and compassion.
Right. So true. So true. Love the it's like so. It's like right in front of you, where you're like, it's not a finite thing, and the more you keep extending it, and yeah, you're so right. Like even the first time I think when we started our community, and someone immediately came to help us, like I was like, why is this person helping us? Like what's in it for? Like why are they doing this? But the more you realize that it's just because they want to get back to the community or help out, the more then you get encouraged to replicate that behavior, or at least it seems normal to do that, right?
Right. It's like the quote. It's like things I hear from people having kids. They're like, I didn't know my love could grow more until I had kids. And like I don't have kids, so I don't know if I would like can understand that. But it's like the same thing goes for like the trust and compassion and all that stuff. It's like it just keeps growing.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah, we just had our first kid 8 months ago, so I can absolutely understand. Thank you. Cool. Thank you so much, Karen. It's been really a pleasure, to have you on our virtual talk, and that was an incredible talk. I'm sure many of us are going to go back and rewatch it, and read some of the links that we'll share with the audience. That will reach out to you. We did add you to our Slack channel that we made for the event. So it's a temporary Slack channel. We'll keep it for till the end of the week usually. So I think there were some incredible questions that came up, and I think that's one of the best parts about this talk, that it's not in the answers, but so often we don't even ask these questions because so often we are just stuck in with our blinders into the microscopic issues in our UX field, and we don't step back and think about these larger societal questions. So I would encourage everyone to not just again use the Slack channel, not just posing the questions to Karen, but even like continuing these conversations and in the Slack channel, outside with your friends, with your family. It's not a problem that will get solved in a day or two, but also won't get solved if we don't take those small steps. So,
right.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you. We hope we'll find another excuse to bring you back for the panel. I think, we really enjoyed. I think you have a wealth of knowledge also around this topic, and your passion and your knowledge speaks for it.
Thank you so much. Like I said, this project is ongoing. I'm continuously learning, and I hope you kind of be part of this project too, because it's like we can learn so much. And and I credit all of like the research I had done and all the frameworks I used to like Black women and Indigenous people who have already been like talking about this all the time. And so
absolutely awesome. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Design X community for coming to attend the talk, and also people who like work behind the scenes to help organize this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that was an incredible talk. I definitely so many different thoughts racing through my mind. So many incredible questions that many of you asked. So thank you so much for that. We will be back with our next virtual event, not talk, in about 2 weeks. There is a lot going on at DesignX right now. As if you are in the Slack community, you would have gotten a few glimpses of it. There's a lot more coming. We've been trying to get all these moving pieces organized, so it's easy for you to follow as well. Coming up with a strict format of having virtual talks, portfolio reviews, as well as casual, group plus one-on-one networking sessions each month. Also, we're trying out new things. So just about 2 days ago, we tried out this thing called Design Jobs AMA on our Slack group. There's another one coming up next week, which we'll share more details about on Monday. So do head to designx.community if you already are not part of it. You can join the Slack group or follow us through our different social media channels to stay up to what we're doing and know about all our events and other activities. So thank you so much. Sorry for the minor AV glitches we had today. I am live streaming from my brother-in-law's office space here in Germany. So still getting used to the tech setup here. But yeah, thank you so much. And I will see most of you on the Slack group. Cheers.